So the last time we learned that Barenziah was fooled by this nightingale creature, then Symmachus came to the rescue, and the nightingale obtained an item of which we do not know yet what power it holds. Now we continue. Symmachus told the half-dozen or so elves who had accompanied him that the nightingale and Queen Barenziah had lost their way and had been set upon by giant spiders, that the nightingale had lost his footing and fallen into a deep crevice which closed over him, that his body could not be recovered, that the queen had been badly shaken by the encounter and deeply mourned the loss of her friend who had fallen in her defense. Such was Symmachus' presence and power of command that the slack-jawed knights, none of whom had caught more than a glimpse of what happened, were convinced that it was all exactly as he said. The queen was escorted back to the palace and taken to her chamber, whereupon she dismissed her servants in waiting. She sat still before her mirror for a long time, stunned, too distraught even to weep. Symmachus stood watching over her. "Do you have any idea at all what you have just done?" he said finally, flatly, coldly. "You should have told me," Barenziah whispered. "The Staff of Chaos. I never dreamed it lay here," he said. A mewling escaped her lips and she doubled over in despair. "Oh, what have I done? What have I done? What happens now? What's to become of me, of us?" "Did you love him?" Yes. Oh, my Symmachus, the gods have mercy on me. But I did love him. But now, I don't know, I'm not sure, Symmachus' hard-lined face softened slightly, and his eyes glittered with new light, and he sighed. "Aye, that's something then. You will become a mother yet if it's within my power. As for the rest, Barenziah, my dearest Barenziah, I expect you have loosed a storm upon the land. It'll be a while yet in the brewing, but when it comes, we'll weather it together, as we always have." I think the nightingale is in fact Jagar Tharn, who replaced Uriel Septim, but I'm not entirely sure. He came over to her then and stripped her of her clothing and carried her to the bed. Out of grief and longing, her enfeebled body responded to his brawny one as it never had before, pouring forth all that the nightingale had wakened to life in her, and in so doing calming the restless ghosts of all he had destroyed. She was empty and emptied, and then she was filled, for a child was planted and grew within her. As her son flourished into the womb, so did her feeling toward patient, faithful, devoted Symmachus, which had been rooted in long friendship and unbroken affection, and which now at last ripened into the fullness of true love. 8 years later they were again blessed, this time with a daughter. It takes that long for an elven child to be born? Apparently, directly after the nightingale's theft of the Staff of Chaos, Symmachus had sent urgent secret communiques to Uriel Septim. He had not gone himself as he would normally have, choosing instead to stay with Barenziah during a fertile period to father a son upon her. For this and for the theft, he suffered Uriel Septim's temporary disfavor and unjust suspicion. Spies were sent in search of the thief, but the nightingale seemed to have vanished, whence he had come, wherever that was. "Dark elf in part, perhaps," said Barenziah, "but part of human too, I think, in disguise, else I would not have come so quickly to fertility. Part dark elf for sure, and of ancient Rathim lineage, and else they would not have been able to free the staff," Symmachus reasoned. He turned to peer at her fixedly. "I don't think he would have lain with you. As an elf he did not dare, for then he would not have been able to part from you." He smiled, then he turned serious once more. Aye, he knew the staff lay there, not the horn, that he must teleport to safety. The staff is not a weapon that would have seen him clear, unlike the horn. Praise the gods at least that he does not have that. It seems all was as he expected, but how did he know? I placed the staff there myself, with the aid of the ragtail end of the Rathim clan, who now sits king in Castle Ebenhard as a reward. Tiber Septim claimed the horn, but left the staff for safekeeping. Aye, now the nightingale can use the staff to sow seeds of strife and dissension wherever he goes, if he wishes. Yet that alone will not gain him power. That lies with the horn and the ability to use it. I'm not sure its power the nightingale seeks, Barenziah said. All seek power, Symmachus said, each in our own way. Not I, she answered. I, my lord, have found that for which I sought. And that ends book 4. Now let's continue to book 5. And if my memory serves me correctly, this is actually the longest book of the 5, so here we go. As Symmachus had predicted, the theft of the Staff of Chaos had few short-term consequences. The current Emperor, Uriel Septim, sent some rather stiff messages expressing shock and displeasure at the staff's disappearance, and urging Symmachus to make every effort to locate its whereabouts and communicate developments to the newly appointed Imperial battle mage, Jagar Tharn, in whose hands the matter had been placed. Must be him. Must be the Nightingale himself. Tharn! Symmachus thundered in disgust and frustration as he paced about the small chamber where Barenziah, now some months pregnant, was sitting serenely embroidering a baby blanket. Jagar Tharn indeed. Aye, I wouldn't give him directions for crossing the street, not if he were a doddering old blind sod. What have you against him, love? I just don't trust that mongrel elf. Part dark elf, part high elf, and part the gods only know what. All the worst qualities of all his combined bloods, I'll warrant. He snorted. No one knows much about him. Claims he was born in southern Valenwood of a wood elven mother. Seems to have been everywhere since. Barenziah, sunk in the contentment and lassitude of pregnancy, had only been humouring Symmachus thus far. But now she suddenly dropped her needlework and looked at him. Something had piqued her interest. Symmachus, could this Jagar Tharn have been the Nightingale, disguised? That's what I was thinking. Symmachus thought this over before replying. Nay, my love, human blood seems to be the one missing component in Tharn's ancestry. To Symmachus, Barenziah knew that was a flaw. Her husband despised wood elves as lazy thieves and high elves as effete intellectuals, but he admired humans, especially Bretons, for their combination of pragmatism, intelligence and energy. The Nightingales of Ebonheart, of the Rathim clan, House Lalu, the House of Mora in particular, I'll be bound. That house has had human blood in it since her time. Ebonheart was jealous that the staff was laid here when Tiber Septim took the horn of summoning from us. Barenziah sighed a little. The rivalry between Ebonheart and Mournhold reached back almost to the dawn of Morrowind's history. Once the two nations had been one, all the lucrative mines held in fief by the Rathims, whose nobility retained the high kingship of Morrowind. Ebonheart had split into two separate city-states, Ebonheart and Mournhold. When Queen Lion's twin sons, grandsons of legendary King Morlin, were left as joint heirs. At about the same time, the office of High King was vacated in favor of a temporary war leader to be named by a council in times of provincial emergency. Still, Ebonheart remained jealous of her prerogatives as the eldest city-state of Morrowind. First among equals was the phrase its rulers often quoted, and claimed that rightful guardianship of the Staff of Chaos should have been entrusted to his ruling house. Mournhold responded that King Morlin himself had placed the staff in the keeping of the god Effen, and Mournhold was unarguably the god's birthplace. Why not tell Jagar Tharn of your suspicions then? Let him recover the thing. As long as it's safe, what does it matter who recovers it, or where it lies? Symmachus stared at her without comprehension. It matters, he said softly after a while, but I suppose not that much. Aye, he added, certainly not enough for you to concern yourself further with it. You just sit there and tend to your, and here he smiled at her wickedly, embroidery. Barenziah flung the sampler at him. It hit Symmachus square in the face, needle, thimble and all. In a few more months Barenziah gave birth to a fine son, whom they named Helseth. Nothing more was heard of the Staff of Chaos or the Nightingale. If Ebonheart had the staff in its possession, they certainly did not boast of it. The years passed swiftly and happily. Helseth grew tall and strong. He was much like his father, whom he had worshipped. When Helseth was 8 years old, Barenziah bore a second child, a daughter, to Symmachus' lasting delight. Helseth was his pride, but little Morgaiah, named for Symmachus' mother, held his heart. Sadly, the birth of Morgaiah was not the harbinger of better times ahead. Relations with the Empire slowly deteriorated for no apparent reason. Taxes were raised and quotas increased with each passing year. Symmachus felt that the Emperor suspected him of having had a hand in the staff's disappearance and sought to prove his loyalty by making every effort to comply with the escalating demands. He lengthened the working hours and raised tariffs and even made up some of the difference from both the royal exchequer and their own private holdings. But the levies multiplied and commoners and nobles alike began to complain. It was an ominous rumble. I want you to take the children and journey to the Imperial city, Symmachus said at last in desperation one evening after dinner. You must make the Emperor listen, else all Mournhold will be up in revolt come spring. He grinned forcibly. You have a way with men, love. You always did. Barenziah forced a smile of her own. "Even with you, I take it." "Yes, especially with me," he acknowledged amiably. "Both children?" Barenziah looked over toward a corner window, where Helseth was strumming a lute and crooning a duet with his little sister. Helseth was 15 by then, Morgaya 8. They might soften his heart. Besides, it's high time Helseth was presented before the Imperial court. "Perhaps, but that's not your true reason." Barenziah took a deep breath and grasped the nettle. "You don't think you can keep them safe here. If that's the case, then you're not safe here either. Come with us," she urged. He took her hands in his. "Barenziah, my love, heart of my heart, if I leave now, there'll be nothing for us to return to. Don't worry about me, I'll be alright. I can take care of myself, and I can do it better if I'm not worrying about you or the children." Barenziah laid her chest against his chest. Head against his chest. "Just remember that we need you. I need you. We can do without the rest of it if we have each other. Empty hands and empty bellies are easier to bear than an empty heart." She started to cry, thinking of the nightingale and that sordid business with the staff. "My foolishness has brought us to this pass." He smiled at her tenderly. "If so, 'tis not so bad a place to be." His eyes rested indulgently on her children. "None of us shall ever go without, or want for anything. Ever. Ever, my love, I promise you. I cost you everything once, Barenziah. I and Tiber Septim. Without my aid, the Empire would never have begun. I helped its rise." His voice hardened. "I can bring about its fall. You may tell Uriel Septim that. And that my patience is not infinite." Barenziah gasped. Symmachus was not given to empty threats. She no more imagined that he would ever turn against the Empire than the old house wolf lying by the grate would turn on her. "How?" she demanded breathlessly. But he shook his head. "Better that you not know," he said. "Just tell him what I told you, should he prove recalcitrant. And do not fear, he is Septim enough that he will not take it out on the messenger." He smiled grimly. "For if he does, if he ever harms the least hair on you, my love, or the children, so help me all the gods of Tamriel, he'll pray that he hadn't been born. I'll hunt him down, him and his entire family, and I won't rest until the last Septim is dead." The red, dark elven eyes of Symmachus gleamed brightly in the ebbing firelight. "I plight you that oath, my love, my queen, my Barenziah." Barenziah held him as tight as she could, but in spite of the warmth in his embrace, she couldn't help shivering. Barenziah stood before the Emperor's throne, trying to explain Mornall's straits. She'd waited weeks for an audience with Uriel Septim, having been fobbed off on this pretext or that. "His Majesty is indisposed. An urgent matter demands His Excellency's attention. I'm sorry, Your Highness, there must be some mistake. Your appointment is for next week." "No, see." And now it wasn't even going well. The Emperor did not even make the slightest pretense at listening to her. He hadn't invited her to sit, nor had he dismissed the children. Helseth stood still as a carven image, but little Morgaya had begun to fuss. The state of her own mind didn't help her any. Shortly upon arrival at her lodgings, the Mournholdian ambassador to the Imperial city had demanded entry, bringing with him a sheaf of dispatches from Symmachus. Bad news, and plenty of it. The revolt had finally begun. The peasants had organized around a few disgruntled members of Mornall's minor nobility and were demanding Symmachus step down and hand over the reins of government. Only the Imperial Guard and a handful of troops whose families had been retainers of Barenziah's house for generations stood between Symmachus and the rebel. Hostilities had already broken out, but apparently Symmachus was safe and still in control. "Not for long," he wrote. He entreated Barenziah to try her best with the Emperor, but in any case she was to stay in the Imperial city until he wrote to tell her if it was safe to go back home with children. She had tried to barge her way through the Imperial bureaucracy, with little success, and to add to her growing panic, all news from Mournhold had come to a sudden stop. Tottering between rage and the Emperor's numerous major domos and fear of the fate awaiting her and her family, the weeks had passed by tensely, agonizingly, remorselessly. Then one day the Mournholdian ambassador came calling to her to tell her she should expect news from Symmachus the following night at the latest, not through the regular channels but by Nighthawk. Seemingly by the same stroke of luck, she was informed that same day by a clerk from the Imperial court that Uriel Septim had finally consented to grant her an audience early on the morrow. The Emperor had greeted the three of them when they came into the audience chamber with a too bright smile of welcome that nonetheless didn't reach his eyes. Then, as she presented her children, he had gazed at them with a fixed attention that was real yet somehow inappropriate. Barenziah had been dealing with humans for nearly 500 years now, and had developed the skill of reading their expressions and movements that was far beyond what any human could ever perceive. 500 years. That's a long time. Try as the Emperor might to conceal it, there was hunger in his eyes and something else. Regret? Yes, regret. But why? He had several fine children of his own. Why covet hers? And why look at her with such a vicious, however brief, yearning? Perhaps he had tired of his consort. Humans were notoriously, though predictably, inconstant. After that one long burning glance, his gaze had shifted away as she began to speak of her mission and the violence that had erupted in Mournhold. He sat still as stone throughout her entire account. Puzzled at his inertia and vexed no end, Barenziah stared into the pale, sad face, looking for some trace of Septims she'd known into the past. She didn't know Uriel Septim well, having met him once when he was still a child, and then again at his coronation 20 years later. Twice, that was all. He'd been a stern and dignified presence at the ceremony, even as a young adult, yet not icily remote as this more mature man was. In fact, despite the physical resemblance, he didn't seem to be the same man at all. Not the same, yet something about him was familiar to her. More familiar than it should be. Some trick of posture or gesture. Because it's Jagar Tharn the Nightingale. Suddenly she felt very hot, as if lava had been poured over her. Illusion. She had studied the arts of illusion well since the Nightingale had deceived her so badly. She had learned to detect it, and she felt it now as certainly as a blind man could feel the sun in his face. Illusion, but why? Her mind worked furiously, even as her mouth went on reciting details about Mournhold's troubles. Vanity? Humans were oft as ashamed at the signs of aging as elves were proud to exhibit them. Yet the face Uriel Septim wore seemed consistent with his age. I think they're talking definitely about the Uriel Septim in this game. The one who died at the start of the game. Barenziah dared use none of her own magic. Even petty nobles had means of detecting magicka, if not actually shielding themselves from its effects, within their own halls. The use of sorcery here would bring down the Emperor's wrath as surely as drawing a dagger would. Magic. Illusion. Suddenly she was brought to mind of the Nightingale. And then he was sitting before her. Then the vision changed and it was Uriel Septim. He looked sad, trapped, and then the vision faded once more and another man sat in his place. Like the Nightingale, and yet unlike. Pale skin, bloodshot eyes, elven ears, and about him a fierce glow of concentrated malice, an aura of eldritch energy, a horrible, destructive shimmer. This man was capable of anything. And then once again she was looking into the face of Uriel Septim. How could she be sure she wasn't imagining things? Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. She felt a sudden vast weariness, as if she'd been carrying a heavy burden too long and too far. She decided to abandon her earnest narrative of Mournhold's ills, as it was quite plainly getting her nowhere, and switch back to pleasantry. Pleasantry, however, with a hidden agenda. Do you remember, sire, Symmachus and I had dinner with your family shortly after your father's coronation. You were no older than tiny Morgaya here. We were greatly honored to be the only guests this evening, except for your best friend Justin, of course. Ah, yes, the Emperor said, smiling cautiously, very cautiously. I do believe I recall that. You and Justin were such friends, your majesty. I was told he died not long after, a great pity. Indeed, I still not like to speak of him. His eyes turned blank, or blanker if it had been possible. As for your request, my lady, we shall take it under advisement and let you know. Barenziah bowed, as did the children. A nod from the Emperor dismissed them, and they backed away from the Imperial presence. She took a deep breath when they emerged from the throne room. Justin had been an imaginary playmate, although young Uriel had insisted a place be set for Justin at every meal. Not only that, Justin, despite the boyish name, had been a girl. Symmachus had kept up the joke long after she had gone the way of imaginary childhood friends, inquiring after Justin's health whenever he and Uriel Septim met, and being responded to in as mock serious a fashion. The last Barenziah had heard of Justin several years ago. The Emperor had evidently joked elaborately to Symmachus that she had met an adventurous though incorrigible Khajiit youth, married him, and settled down in Lillandril to raise fire, ferns, and mugworts. The man sitting on the Emperor's divan was not Uriel Septim. The Nightingale? Could it be? Yes, yes! A chord of recognition rang through her, and Barenziah knew she was right. It was him, it was the Nightingale, masquerading as the Emperor. Symmachus had been wrong, so wrong. What now, she wondered frantically. What had become of Uriel Septim? And more to the point, what did it mean for her and Symmachus and all of Mournhold? Thinking back, Barenziah guessed that their troubles were due to this false emperor, this nightingale-spawned glamour, or whatever he really was. He must have taken Uriel Septim's place shortly before the unreasonable demands on Mournhold had begun. That would explain why relations had deteriorated for so long as humans reckon time, long after her disapproved liaison with Tiber Septim. The Nightingale knew of Symmachus' famed loyalty to, and knowledge of, the Septim house, and was effecting a preemptive strike. If that were the case, they were all in terrible danger. She and the children were in his power here in the Imperial City, and Symmachus was left alone to deal with troubles of the Nightingales brewing in Mournhold. And that's where we leave off. The next time, I will be reading the last part of the real Barenziah.